Are we streaming to anybody?
Yes, we are.
We are. Good. Okay. And I am joined by Paul Reynolds on my left, on my far left, and Garrett Stevens on my nearer left, and Graham Elliott on my left.
Sorry, Chair. I was just looking at who else. They are
the members of the. We are the members of the committee.
Yes.
And I was then going to go and ask you to go round and introduce yourselves,
Yeah. I am
please.
Nigel Halkett, the CFO.
Claire Dempsey, Head of Financial Services. Chrissy Dunhill, HR Manager.
I'm Chris Fennell, Head of Beauty and Leisure.
Ian Ross, Assistant Director for Neighbourhood Delivery.
Trudy Angel will be taking the minutes this evening.
Can I say right at the outset that I am very pleased to see the officers here, because I think it's very important that for all the audit things that officers do come along and they can contribute with clarification if need be, but also it's good that they hear our deliberations. And we also have
Philip Lazenby, Head of Internal Audit, representative of TIA.
And up in Manchester.
Hello, good evening. Chris Paisley, Director from KPMG External Audit.
Excellent. And Councillor Reynolds is substituting for Councillor Friedman tonight, so thank you very much indeed for that. We don't have any apologies, or do we?
Just Councillor Friedman.
Sorry?
Just Councillor Friedman.
Yeah, okay.
Just one apology on behalf of officers. Ben Hosey was going to be here for the procurement of internal audit, but it's his partner's birthday this evening. So I willingly said that I would take any queries, and he could come back at a later date if required.
That's awesome.
Worryingly, he did only remember it was his partner's birthday yesterday, but that's something not permitted.
Is he coming by?
And also we welcome Councillor William Allen, who is portfolio holder for all matters finance and staff, and Sally Sewington, who is the leader of the council. So I think, and of course we mustn't forget Trudy Angel, who is just magnificent.
That's minuted.
It's being recorded.
Broadcast to the nation.
Thanks.
Sorry, Chair, I should also add Kim Knight, the Manager of Licensing, is also on via Teams, just in case anything comes under that report.
Hi there.
Hello, Kim.
I told you about me not to phone you this time.
I know, and it was a hot tip as well, but never mind. Right, we've done apologies for absence. Declaration of interest, are there any? I don't believe there are, so that's fine. Minutes of the last meeting, can I take those as being true and accurate record, in which case, if they are, I will sign them after the meeting. Yep, good, thank you very much. There's no public participation, and with that leaves us straight into item 5, the external audit. Matthew. Christopher. Sorry, Chris. Thank you. Do you want to introduce your audit and say a few words before I open it up to colleagues on the committee?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for enabling me to join you virtually this evening. It's a big help for my diary. So on the agenda this evening, we've got a draft year-end report that summarises the findings of our work on the financial statements and also the outcome of our value for money risk assessment work. It's been included in the papers to give assurance to the committee on the progress we're making with the audit and points ahead to the finalisation of both the accounts and the VFM work by the time of the next committee meeting, and well in advance, therefore, of the statutory publication deadline of the 27th of February 2026. I don't propose to take you through page by page through the document, but I was going to just highlight some of the key points. Firstly, on page 2 of our report, or page 10 of your agenda pack, we've outlined the fact that we have not identified today any material unadjusted misstatements, from our work, and therefore we anticipate issuing an unqualified audit opinion, in layman's terms a clean opinion, on the financial statements, subject to the satisfactory resolution of the items outlined on the right-hand side of page 3. On to page 3 then, we have summarised the findings in respect of the significant risk areas which have progressed further since this report was drafted, and I can say with a good degree of confidence that the risks we've outlined are unlikely to at this point result in any material misstatements to the in the financial statements. One point of correction relates to the top middle section of that page 3 of our report, which is entitled Uncorrected Audit Misstatements. That should, of course, read corrected audit misstatements, as the single item that we've referred to there has been amended in the updated statement of accounts, which is also elaborated on further in on page 37 of the report. There was one amendment to our audit plan and strategy subsequent to the plan being presented to you in July, and that relates to our highlighting at the time as an other, i.e. non-significant risk relating to the adoption of IFRS 16, and there's more details I think on page 4 relating to that. So for background, IFRS 16 requires all adopting entities to recognise on the balance sheet any lease liabilities and a corresponding right of use asset for any assets that are leased by the entity, whether under a formal or informal leasing arrangement. Those that are expected to last longer than 12 months anyway. So we flagged this as another audit risk at the time, because at the time we were unsure the extent to which this change would affect the council. But having reviewed the work of the council to identify any related lease arrangements and give them accounting recognition on the balance sheet, it's clear that the number and value of those lease arrangements is highly immaterial, and therefore in this year-end report we've downgraded and de-recognised that as an audit risk of misstatement. Pages 6 through to 14 of the report set out the significant risks that we previously reported as part of our planning, and we've largely completed our work on these risks at this point in time. In particular, I'm happy to say that we concluded our work on the LGPS pension liability, which was more of a stumbling block and took us longer last year. So that's in a good shape this year, which is good. That work is done in its entirety on the pensions, and there are no material issues to raise in respect of that pensions risk. On the pension assumptions, we've included on page 40 of our report, or page 48 of your pack, a summary of our actuarial specialist's assessment of the assumptions for this year that underpin the LGPS pension liability, which we found to be cautious this year overall, but within our normally acceptable range. The other area I want to just dwell on briefly is the value for money risk assessment. Pages 19 through to 30 of our report articulate that risk assessment procedures undertaken and the outcomes of those procedures. As you can see, we haven't identified any significant risks that there are weaknesses in the value for money arrangements this year. And so the next step is for us to prepare our annual auditor's report, which builds on this content, as well as providing some additional commentary on the year-end outturn and financial planning around the 25-26 year. We did identify one new recommendation, which is included on page 30 of our report, which is a non-significant recommendation that pertains to ensuring that the strategic risk register is presented to Cabinet and Audit Committee each quarter. Lastly, in terms of things to point out specifically, I wanted to highlight our independence confirmation, which is on pages 34 to 36 of our report, and confirms that we performed an assessment of our independence and are happy that we're independent in all respects of the council throughout 24-25. So in terms of next steps, we've got a responsibility under the updated guidance from MHCLG to complete and publish our final value for money commentary by the 30th of November this year. So our intention is that by the end of November to produce a final updated version of this report that you have, in addition to an annual auditor report, which is the public-facing version, a more summarised version at a higher level of our overall findings. And we intend to do all of that ahead of the 30th of November deadline. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have on the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Chris. I'll come in due course to William if he wants to add anything a bit later on. Okay, if you do, but you don't have to. Colleagues, questions, comments, please? Graham.
On the valuation of council dwellings, you've got 1.189 million. What's the methodology used in that? Because clearly you can't just value the houses on the open market, because they have a whole bunch of assured tenancies which are pretty rock solid. So you couldn't really just sell them and someone buys them in investment, because rents are sort of capped or will go up by a certain level, and you can't evict a whole bunch of tenants if you want to increase the rent. So it's a slightly different situation from maybe a private landlord. So how do we look at this? And you looked at the people that have valued it. What's the methodology that they have used?
So let me jump in on how we approach it, and then Chris can feedback on how they review the mechanisms that we do. Because one of the findings in the report is the fact that we don't have an in-house valuation service. And one of the questions to Chris, just to prepare you, is how many authorities that you deal with do have an in-house valuers? Probably very little, if any. We use Wilts Head Eads, who are used by a huge amount of the sector. Could almost say it's a monopoly. I think every authority I know uses them. So from that perspective, we use them as an independent valuers. They value assets in different asset classes. So, for instance, our commercial investment property is valued as in use every year.
Yeah.
All of it is, the whole portfolio, every year, in line with statute, whereas other parts of the portfolio are done on a separate basis. So it's not on a commercial basis, it's on an as-use basis. The housing portfolio, which is the large part of our portfolio, is valued over a 5-year ongoing cycle. And the housing portfolio is split into what we call beacon groups. So the whole housing stock of 10,000 plus homes is in little pots of houses that are all similar in style and nature and location.
Yeah.
And every year, 20% of the portfolio is revalued. And those beacon groups are then revalued up or down, depending on what that revaluation is, and it's averaged out across the whole portfolio. So in a rolling 5-year cycle, the whole portfolio of housing is revalued. It is valued as use. So if it's social housing, it's as a social house. So it'll be valued significantly lower than a private sector house. And that's done by Wilts Head Eads, and they have a set methodology that they use. This is where KPMG come in every year, and they would review their methodology, question and challenge. Up to this year, and Chris will feedback now on their approach, up to this year, every year we've had a to and fro between the auditor and the valuers on methodology, indexation, what evidence was used, why that was used, whether it was fit and proper or not. And we have a constant 3-4 month ongoing debate, because, as you've kind of pointed out, the biggest number on all of this is our balance sheet valuation of our property, 1.2 billion pounds for housing, I think it is, and 1.5 billion roughly overall. So that's the big number, which is why auditors crawl all over it, because even a small percentage out is a huge number. So there's a lot of work goes into that. I'll hand over to Chris in terms of where KPMG picked that up and whether he feels it's fit and proper in terms of the way that Wilts Head Eads do it. Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, so I couldn't have put it better myself in terms of the methodology that's used for valuing the dwellings. So that is as the discussion has alluded to, it's a significant estimate, and it is subject to a significant degree of estimation uncertainty. So as auditors, that presents us with a challenge, because if you have an item of expenditure for which there is an invoice presented by a supplier, we can directly corroborate that item to a piece of paper, and job done. With an estimate of this significance, what you have to do is effectively look at the inputs and the assumptions that have been pulled together by management's expert. So in this case, that's Wilts Head Eads. So what we do is we break that valuation down. So as Nigel's just very, very clearly articulated, there is a process by which the housing stock is grouped into beacons of similar archetypes, is the term that we use. So in a particular area, two bed semi would be grouped together as a single archetype, and they would have a single beacon, which is effectively a representative of that overall group. So the first thing is, is that grouping correct? So that's the first thing we look at, but that doesn't tend to change year on year unless something drastic happens. So we'd look at that. We'd also look at the work that the valuer has done, what Ted and Eve have done for those identified beacon properties, to identify suitable comparator market transactions. So in other words, what is the market value on the open market of those properties? And then, as you rightly point out, the value to the council of those is substantially below market value because of the return vis-a-vis the social housing rents that are achievable by those properties. So helpfully, we have published metrics for that, published adjustment factors. We call it an EUVSH, existing use value for social housing rating, and that is effectively an adjustment factor to reduce down the value. I think for your area, I believe the published rate is 35%, but it's allowable to move 5% up or down within that according to the nature of the portfolio and the specific location. So there's lots of different bits there, lots of different inputs. There's data inputs in terms of the properties themselves and the extrapolation, how that exercise takes place. There's assumptions in terms of value. There's assumptions in terms of whether you adjust that 35% that I referred to. So what we do is break it down into all of those things, and we audit them almost separately. And when I say audit them, there isn't a piece of paper that can confirm that, but what we're looking at is it reasonable? Is there bias, inherent bias within the assumptions that have been made by management's experts and then adopted by management, or do we think that it's been undertaken effectively in good faith with good access to good information and so on? I've not got any concerns over that for this year. To sort of sum up, we're content that Wilson and Eve have undertaken a rigorous process and used reasonable assumptions. So that is kind of the overall outcome of that. But you're quite right in terms of highlighting that it's a very, very significant number, and it's also subject to a significant degree of estimation uncertainty, which is, as Nigel says, why we crawl all over it, I think was the words he used.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Garrick.
Could I just say,
sorry, did you want to
elaborate on the question that I put?
Which is why I elaborated. Right. I was trying to answer both.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it's a far better explanation than the few lines that I've got back in the answer here. But now I think we've got a better understanding of how it's all done. Thank you.
Okay. Paul.
On this very similar point, and it might be my understanding, but where it says every 5 years there is a more detailed valuation involving inspection of beacon properties, Nigel, you're saying that's rolling? So rolling every 5 years?
We do 20% every year in terms of those groups, and we do an ongoing review, but then every 5 years there's normally a forensic deep dive to make sure that nothing's been missed.
That is a physical inspection.
Yeah, so that's where it says the latest of the full valuations was done January 2020. So is that done due
at the moment, we're revaluing our properties or reviewing our properties, physical, seeing them. I think it's a 3-year cycle.
For HRA, it's 5 years.
5-year cycle at the moment, and we're about 2 and a bit years, 3 years into that. So that's part of that. After that 5-year cycle, we would have physically reviewed every property. So some 2,000 properties per year on average. We did more in the early years than we do in the latter years. And what that then does is then feed into the final 5-year kind of review of those beacon groups as well. And that's where, as Christopher alluded to, we might make some movement in beacon groups where we've physically inspected them and something has changed significantly on some properties compared to others. But with a housing stock of 10,000 plus, you can't do anything quickly.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Right, I've got 2 or 3 questions I just wanted clarification on, please. If I could take you to our page 20, your page 12, our findings, 3rd bullet point, that you say there, while cautious overall, these assumptions applied are within the KPMG's acceptable range. Do you want to say a little bit about what your acceptable range is? Because it's not identified, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite deliberate in the sense that the acceptable range of assumptions that our actuarial team we have expert actuaries within KPMG who re-evaluate the actuarial valuation that's been undertaken by Barnett Waddingham in this case, and so what they do is similar really in nature to what I just described in terms of the HRA properties, is to break that down into its constituent parts, because estimating the liability in the future is made up of lots of different assumptions, which I think are outlined in one of the appendices. So what they're doing there is essentially establishing a reasonable range by which you would effectively have a material swing in the overall liability one way or another. Again, it's about reasonableness here. It's not saying that our valuers have a better view than Barnett Waddingham. It's simply saying that using the data that our valuers have available and working with across a number of different valuation firms as we do interact with them throughout the year, this is our kind of central range, a sort of benchmark range, but it isn't by any means, describing something as cautious is simply saying that relative to our sort of central position within that range, the overall profile of assumptions is on the more cautious end in vis-a-vis creates a higher overall liability, but not in a material fashion. Hence, it's within the acceptable range, if that makes sense. I can't give a specific figure on any of this because it is sort of it is taken by our actuaries in the round, having assessed all of the assumptions individually and in combination.
And I'm sure that Trudy got all of that to be able to write it into the minutes of this meeting.
Happy to follow up by email if there's any clarification.
No, I think I've heard enough about the acceptable range. Thank you very much. We'll have a quiz about it and see who remembers. There's on page our page 22, your page 14. You just make a reference in our findings. And I know I'm sort of cross-examining you, if you like, and you're the external auditors, so you're not contracted to us. Like I might talk to Philip and look at his details, but you say that you'll give a verbal update to the audit committee on the 17th of September. Have I missed it, or have you actually given that as part of your initial answer? I think this is it.
Yes and no. It's sort of in the round, yes, but it's with respect to that specific point, what we do in relation to management override controls is select any journal entries, any transactions that have been posted to the ledger that meet our high risk criteria. That work is in progress. I'm content that there is nothing from that work that is going to result in any material issues for the accounts, but we're still in the process of concluding that and documenting that at the moment.
Thank you for that. I mean, I come to these on the basis, if you like, of an uneducated bystander who would look at these comments and think, what do they mean about that? And that's what I'm just teasing out from you, the explanation. I think you've already mentioned, and it's probably one for Nigel, lack of strategic risk register on our page 38, your page 30.
That's entirely my responsibility.
Yes.
And one of the quarter strategic risk reports was produced, did go through all the officer internal review and assessment, but didn't make it onto the audit committee agenda in January last year when it should have done. There was a slight change in officers, which you'll probably remember at the time, but it did fall through the cracks, and that's my responsibility. It is the first time it has been missed in 7 years. But it won't be missed this year. And the first quarter report and second quarter report are coming to the next audit committee.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody? Any more? No? Right, I've got a couple more. Chris, on page 40, our page 43, your page 35, 2 questions there. One, and they are typos, but the reason I'm raising them is because as a result of the typo, it doesn't, I think, make sense. In the first item under disclosure, you say in the second bullet point under safeguards applied, the work is performed is not relied on during the audit. What I think you've got too many is is in there. What did you mean to say?
Yeah, that's quite right. There is one too many is. Yeah, you're quite right that what we should have said there, and apologies for that oversight. It should say that the work performed with respect to this particular non-audit service, this grant piece of work, this assurance piece of work, isn't relied on during the financial statements audit. So in other words, the work that my colleagues do, which is an entirely separate function, perform in relation to the housing benefit certification and the housing capital receipt certification, we have no regard to it as part of the audit. We don't look at it for assurance. It doesn't inform our work in any way, and that's a really important safeguard in terms of what we call a self-review threat, which is one of the sort of standard threats to independence as an auditor that we have to be wary of and safeguard against. So in other words, what they do is completely it does not affect our work on the accounts in any way. That's what we're trying to say with that comment, which was obviously erroneous.
On that same line, and I'm forgive me, but I'm confused because you say value of services delivered. Are they your services or are they somebody else's services?
They're services delivered by KPMG staff, but they're effectively non-audit work delivered by KPMG staff, not from a separate team unrelated to the external audit of the financial statements.
So are you saying that the value of the services delivered by KPMG on either disclosure 1 or 2 amount to 30 or 10 million pounds each?
So they should be thousands. That's another good spot. I do apologise. That's thousands rather than millions, but I do apologise.
I often feel that when I'm reading these things, not necessarily here, but in other places, that people leave little things in thinking, will Terry spot it? And the trouble is, sometimes Terry does. But on a serious point, we have to rely on these figures as our external auditors. And so I would ask that perhaps somewhere in KPMG they look at the proofreading of these things, so that I'm not asking difficult questions or potentially embarrassing questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's a fair challenge, and I'm sure that's corrected in the updated version. And yeah, we don't have any further such instances.
Okay. Paul, Garrick, Graham?
I'm fine.
Me? No. William, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you.
No? Fine. I think that we have a duty to note the comments.
Yes.
Which we do. And we thank you, Chris.
There is just one other recommendation
Apologies.
on the headline report, and that is around asking the committee if we would be able to move forward the date of the next audit committee from December the 3rd to potentially November the 26th, or something suitable in the last week in November. Let me just explain to the committee why. This is a draft audit findings report, and the final audit findings report and value for money report need to be published in line with statute before the end of November. So the next audit committee is just a few days after that. Now, we would have 2 options as a committee. We could either, 1, delegate approval of the final audit findings report and value for money assessment to the audit committee chair, who could sign those off. Or my preference is to just move that audit committee a week earlier so that the whole of the audit committee can review any final report. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, given the audit findings report you've got in front of you and the commentary we've had from Christopher, it all seems very clean and it should all be very much a straightforward tick through. But the last thing I want is for something to come up over the next few months and at the last minute try and arrange an audit committee meeting because we've got issues we need to raise. I'd rather bring that meeting forward a week and just rubber stamp probably what we've gone through today without any risks to the organisation in terms of beating that statutory deadline. And
so far as I'm concerned, we are a committee, so I would prefer it if we do actually meet before the end of November as the committee. I'm happy to sign it off, but I do stress that we are a committee. Are you content with a change to a meeting from early December to late-ish in November?
Yeah, fine.
And
Yes.
we'll circulate a date or some dates. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Sorry, Garrick.
Bearing in mind that we might need to avoid clashing with that final meeting before the LGR.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
18th of November deadline, I think, that, so it would be the week after that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we'll make sure that it doesn't clash with anything like that. Yeah.
That will
Okay,
be Trudy's challenge.
well done. Chris, thank you once again.
Thank you all. Much appreciated.
Family, so it's good to see you and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, hopefully in person next time in November. So look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Right, let's move on to the SICA. Now, in fact, before we actually get into these, you'll see that there is an abbreviated SICA report for each of these, and then later on it's sort of the same report but amplified in full detail. And having read both of them, I feel, it's my feeling that the abbreviated, the executive summary, although it's more than just a summary, is sufficient for these meetings. So I'm going to suggest for your approval that we actually don't have going forward the extended SICA reports in the meeting, but we do have them available for anybody to peruse. And if there is any red or difficult items that come up as a result of the SICA, then we would have the full report contained within the agenda papers. Are the three of you content with that?
Agreed. Yes.
Excellent, thank you. In which case, there you go, that's solved your first bit. So let's move on then. Sorry.
Yeah. Can I ask that I have a copy of this report, if it's not going to be published?
So the SICA report will still be published.
Yeah.
The individual internal audit reports will only be published if they are limited or no assurance reports. In terms of the internal audit reports, the full reports, all members can have access to them whenever, and I can arrange for all those to be sent to you, Sally.
So what's called the agenda supplement is the thing that we won't be getting at this meeting.
The agenda.
Yes, so the additional documents,
Yeah.
the individuals, they are summarised as part of the SICA in terms of the findings. You won't get they'll be part of the agenda for noting, but not necessarily for discussing unless members saw something that they really wanted to raise, because the SICA would highlight the main findings from those reports. So they're still going to be available, they're just not.
Okay, sorry, I'm just not clear about how one gets hold of them.
You can have them.
By request.
No?
By request.
No, you can have
Yeah.
them. We'll make sure that you have them. You'll get a copy of the.
I mean, assuming you're amenable, I can literally add you to the distribution list for every report as it goes final, if that's all right with yourself.
But having said that, all the papers are on ModGov anyway.
That's where I'm looking at it, but what I'm hearing from you is that that's not going to be the case.
The extended one
Yeah.
won't be the case, but you can have the extended ones, and we will be able to have the extended ones by choice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Philip, procurement.
Fabulous. Well, if I may start at the beginning. So this is the summary internal control assurance represents the audits that have been undertaken since the last meeting took place. As at the 9th of September, it's important to note, so as at a week and a half ago, represents a number of audits that have been completed. Pleased to be able to report that on this occasion, all the audits that I'm reporting back to you are a reasonable assurance. As we relayed earlier, there is enclosed within the SICA a summary of that, and I'm just going to kind of lightly touch on that. But before I do, I just want to talk through some of the other aspects of this document that you have presented in front of you. So firstly, in respect of recommendations, there have been no priority one recommendations in respect of any of the reports that have been issued since the last audit report. Important to note that because that obviously would impact upon the head of internal audit opinion, and in the event that that occurs, it's obviously my duty to highlight that to yourselves. The second thing is to highlight that there have been no additional changes requested in respect of the audit plan. That would also be a good thing. Moving on from there, I just want to talk through the summary that's here, and by way of a mea culpa, just express that one of the reports here has got a faulty heading on it, for which I can only apologise. It was highlighted to me earlier by the chair of this committee. The contents of the section itself are actually correct, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The first of the audit reports is procurement. In respect of procurement, there are just a few recommendations, and I don't propose to talk through these in any particular level of detail, though I will pause after having talked through this particular audit, just in case anyone's got any questions. There is one priority 2 recommendation, 2 routine recommendations, and for completeness, the 2 operational effectiveness matters have been included within this document. Management have provided a very fulsome response in respect of the recommendations that were made, and the clear standout, I guess, would be in respect of the procurement strategy where there has been a delay. Management provided a good reason as to why that had occurred, and you will see that there is a reasonable trajectory, the completion date, which is not so far from now. I will stop at that juncture and ask if anyone has any questions in respect of this particular report.
Paul Garrett Graham? No?
No.
Well, while we're in procurement, and I do note the new timelines for the strategy, but it has slipped a bit. So, are you comfortable that it's back on track?
I'm very comfortable that it's back on track. I think the main part of the report to kind of reflect is the previous strategy ended in 2024. At that point, we expected the Procurement Act to be rolled out in October 2024, at which point we would have refreshed the strategy in line with the revised Procurement Act. But the Procurement Act was delayed. That wasn't just a simple, here's the Act, we're delaying it by 5 months. It was, we're still reviewing the Act, but we'll roll it out in 5 months. So at that point, it delayed us being able to write our strategy. And then when it was rolled out in February, we've been very much focused on the training and implementation of the Procurement Act, which has gone incredibly well for the organisation in terms of making sure that we followed those deadlines. But it did mean that did delay the delivery of a revised strategy. That will be done in this calendar year, and that will reflect the new Procurement Act as well. That's the main reason for the significant finding part of the procurement.
There's one other point, or a couple of other points that I picked up. No? I look at you three and jump in. No?
No.
There was an item, I think, about the in-trend.
Yeah.
And I just got the feeling that, and it's picked up a bit on page 15 about training. It felt to me as though there's a little bit of slippage, and just things drifting past, i.e. People, nobody's been using it, so it's not been dealt with, and then the training was sort of just a bit delayed. And that sort of worries me a little bit.
I can see how you picked that up from the report. I think the issue was we've had an extremely settled procurement team for many years, as in they haven't changed at all. And because of that, monitoring and maintaining who has access to that system and doesn't slipped down the list of things that were important. As we've had more flux and we've had temporary people coming in to help us with the Procurement Act, it did get brought out in the audit that we hadn't been managing that as effectively as we could do. So that is now part of management controls and is regularly monitored by the procurement manager. But I can see how you would see that as something that they felt like we'd lost a little bit of grip. I think it was just a case of people got very comfortable with where we were at and didn't realise that you've got to constantly change these things. That's why we have internal audit. We have internal audit to come along and say, you've slipped at this, or you're not doing this control that you should be doing, or how about a new control? So from that perspective, you know, it's good that they find these things. It's not so good that it's slipped in the first place.
But it's why you've got an audit committee as well.
It is.
You've been very open about that and the answer to my question. Are you delivering that awareness across the whole of the council? Because we picked it up here in procurement, but it may apply in other places. I'm not saying it does, but it's just one of those things that might do with just a watchful eye over it.
Again, what we try to do when we look at internal audits is, if me and Philip will meet regularly, if there are findings that come up that we feel will cross organisation wide, then that's when I can put memos, or we can look at certain sectors that instead of just a procurement internal, I might say to Philip, can we do a review of controls in this area, like managing databases across the organisation, because I feel that maybe we might have slipped. And we do that when we review the programme. And one of the things, I think Phil will probably come to later, we're looking to probably come back to this committee in November to start looking at developing the future programme with the audit committee at the heart of what that programme will look like. And again, that's around trying to evolve and make use of what you're seeing in these reports for our future reviews. But we don't look at these in isolation. I certainly don't. I look at them in groups, and it's quite handy to sit above that to a certain extent, because I can look at 5 reports and go, there's a theme here. We need to look at A, B, or C. And that's my role. My role is to try and check those checks and balances across the organisation. I don't feel this is something that has slipped across the board, but it was definitely something that, you know, we need to tighten up.
Yeah, that's fine. Sally or William, do you want to add anything to that? Is it your portfolio, William, or not?
Well, I assume it is, but...
No, you're okay. That's fine. That's all right. I'm just giving you the opportunity because I know what it's like to sit and listen and feel I want to add. But anything else on that procurement? No? Okay. We move on to community grants then. That's the next one on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so community grants, relatively low risk from our perspective, doesn't come up on the audit plan frequently. The values referred to are relatively low. The risk profiling from our own exercises previously has been relatively low. There are 2 recommendations that have been raised here. The first of those is in respect of KPIs. Management have provided a fulsome response in respect of that. Just worth adding in respect of KPIs, I think it's an area that generally warrants a little bit of additional attention, because talking about these thematic issues, there are a number of recommendations relating to the importance of KPIs during the course of this summary update for the 5 reports that I'm providing an update on today. I will stop at that point and ask if anyone has any questions.
Graham?
Yeah, Philip, it's heartening to see that basically, you know, someone gets a grant and they've got to provide invoices, etc., proof that you know, they've actually spent it on the right thing. Are you totally happy this is the case? I know it's not a massive amount as per the income of the spend of the council, but
yeah. So actually, when it came to me from the auditor, initially it had, I think, 1 recommendation, and I went through it very thoroughly, added an extra 7 and said, go away and prove to me that these are not the case. And so the auditor did, and came back with a more streamlined version. I'm very satisfied that that there is a good evidence base that is appropriate given the financial level of risk, the exposure. You don't really want to wrap people up in red tape, and there is a reason why these grants are there. I think if I was to benchmark it against other organisations, which I did do as part of this, I benchmarked against 10 other organisations, I think that the controls in place are certainly towards the upper end of the controls that I would think appropriate.
Okay, fine, thank you.
And thank you for that, Philip. I know we've covered this previously, but my driving ambition is that the Coreham Borough Council should be the exemplar of good practice. So all of these things, they are very small, but it's perfection, as near as we can get to it. Chris and Pretty, because this I think is in your, do you want to add anything? Is it yours?
It is mine. We were brought forward on the audit plan and we were happy to accommodate that. We had just implemented the recommendations from the previous one, so we had an open, honest and dialogue with the auditors. They came back and asked where did the 75 pence go from, which we were able to clarify, which is always a great thing to do. We've now reached a point where we've got a triage in place and we're not taking people through the panel who shouldn't be at panel. So we're meeting regularly now. So we're either signposted CAD or other funding processes. So we're not then deferring. And I think that came out of the last recommendation and we're much more streamlined. And we also benchmark with other grant making organisations in the county. So we nick their ideas, we nick their, so it goes from there. So I think David Barnett in my team's a really thorough job in doing this. And the tweaks into the criteria recently at SLT means we're much more aligned. We'll sign off and review the criteria on an annual basis in line with the reports and produce that impact statement that will say these are the benefits, because some of the groups we're funding are non-constituted groups. So when they are non-constituted, we don't give them the £4,500. That goes to CAD and they act as the banker. So we've put mechanisms in place to make sure that we're not funding individuals. So yes.
I should say, and possibly on behalf of Sally and myself and William, that we are all trustees of Community Action Decorum. But I say that just for correctness, but that aspect of it doesn't involve us in that way at all. So, but thank you.
What I would say for local intelligence, Loretta sits on our panel as a non-voting observer just because of that local intelligence that she has, that she says this group is really good and they help support those applications to us to make sure we're not there to help them write the applications. That's what we pay CAD for. And so, yeah, we've got a very good working relationship. But, yeah, thank you to the team for the work they've done.
Well, thank you too for accommodating, particularly when I sent the auditor back to ask some more questions. Yeah, thank you.
75 pence, yeah. 76, yeah.
The letters KPIs pop up quite frequently, and is that Pretty? Did you want to say anything about KPIs and training for KPIs or anything, or in this particular context particularly?
I think this is completely Chris's bag, so yeah.
Okay.
Pretty will get her chance.
I'll get my chance with the sickness one, I think, later on.
Okay. Which one?
Sickness audit.
Oh, right. Yes.
KPIs involved there.
Yeah, right. Okay. Good. William.
But Terry, if I may, it's interesting you brought up the Community Action Decorum. I think one of the things that I understand from having that hat on is there's very much appreciated by the voluntary sector that there is a very balanced and reasonable and non-onerous process in place. And that's a marked difference to previous practice of a few years ago. And I think the fact that it's getting through audit so comfortably is really great, that we've got a balance between proper scrutiny and accountability and not being overly expecting too much from the voluntary sector, who are as stretched as anybody these days.
Yeah, I mean, the first line of discussion and inquiry actually would come with the Overall Scrutiny Committee, wouldn't it? So that's where, if you like, you can wave the banner strongly for that. Anything else on community grants? Sorry.
I could just follow through, because if we're giving money to non-constituted groups, it's CAD then who are going to effectively police that, all right? So we're relying on that. So effectively the liability is with them to make sure it goes in the right way with some degree of control.
So the idea of giving it to CAD to be the banker is that they could then work with that group to become constituted and help them with their governance arrangements. Right. So part of the grant making offer we give to them is that we pay for their year one membership of CAD to help them on that process.
Right. Speak to me afterwards.
What can I say? Right, are we all happy with that one? Right, onwards to parking. This is going to be Ian's one. Yeah.
So parking services income are going to take the documentation as read. This is an interesting audit in that obviously it is an important income stream to the organisation at large. Part of its commercial strategy effectively underpinned by this. 3 priority 2 recommendations, 2 priority 3 recommendations and an operational effectiveness matter. So it's important to say that this audit took place at a period of transition, really. So the contract effectively is going through a process which you've no doubt read about in respect of here. And while there were some gaps noted, it was management's intention, I believe, to entrench some of the developments that have been noted within here as part of the contract going forward. Also worth highlighting that while there are discrepancies noted during the course of the review, the discrepancies were not material and we were absolutely certain there was no underlying attempt to perpetrate fraud, far from it. The only kind of recommendation where there is a management response that I guess I would take issue with is the priority 3 action down below where we alluded to operational risk. We said that there wasn't an operational or strategic risk in respect of this. And management said, well, car parking income is monitored monthly as part of budget monitoring with any discrepancies reported upwards. That would cover off any risks. From my perspective, particularly going forward, there's a requirement within our planning process to clearly link the audits that we undertake against risks that your organisation has. If we can't do that, it begs the question why the audit is in there in the first place. And so I think it is really important that we explicitly denote what the risk is, that that's clearly emphasised and understood by management within the risk documentation, that it's clearly articulated at the start of the report and understood. And that should be entrenched within the policy-related documentation, if appropriate as well, and effectively your controls are then built around the risk that you face. So while I accept management's response and are not overly concerned about it, I do think with global internal audit standards having emphasised the need to be risk-based on our work, I do think that is an area that I would like management to ideally go away and think about. And at that point, I will stop and ask if anyone has any questions.
Okay. Anybody? No? Ian, sorry? Yes, Paul.
Just one. I was just looking at the discrepancies, variances bit.
Sure.
And I was just wondering, just for clarity in my mind, so there was one error that was over £20, and then it says the discrepancies were small, however, one of them was over £20. How many?
I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but we did look through it, and it definitely did not keep me awake that night. It didn't make me lose any sleep. Some of them, in fact, were the other way. So, I was pretty comfortable. I mean, did you want to talk to that at all?
No, I mean, I think you're always going to get. I suspect you get the odd foreign coin and things like that go through the machine. So, I mean, as part of the new contract, we will be rolling out new pay and display machines. The ones we've got are old, they've been refurbished ones, so they're definitely at the end of their lifespan now, so hopefully that will reconcile that. But no, I mean, we take on board the audit, take on board Philip's comment about risk management. New contract starts on the 1st of October, so we can embed all these quickly, and for the first time in a long while, Dan, who you'll all know, we'll have a full team with be fully staffed for the first time in a long time as well. So we've got that extra capacity that we can use to deliver the recommendations.
Yeah, I get the feeling that the new contract will give you exactly the opportunities that you just described. Just make sure that they stay at the high level, which is good. Yeah.
Sorry, one other point was the recommendation around the policies and procedures. I actually entrenched quite a lot of policies and procedures there because I did a trawl of the internet, and so I didn't kind of like go through it in a lot of detail there, but yeah, you probably just...
And it's something that Dan and myself have discussed. There's a lot of existing policies that have been around for a long time now that probably need review. Yeah.
Yes, it's I think that almost goes back to some of the points that Nigel's made earlier on about time and yeah.
So just one point for the committee. I think again, when we look at that overview, the timing of this audit was very specific, and we often do that. We've done HTIP audits at certain points in time when we want some direction from internal audit as well as we want to check, and this was primarily done given the new contract was starting on the 1st of October. And as Philip's alluded to, we're going to take those new findings onto day one of the new contract, which is when we use internal audit sometimes to help us shape things. And this was one of those times where we were getting checks and balances, but helping shape how the new contract starts on the right footing. So again, it's how we use it as a tool.
And the contract is, the contract is being placed on the 1st of October. Does it come into force on the 1st of October?
Yes, it starts on the 1st of October.
So are we is the new contractor details in the public domain?
Yeah, so it's the same contract.
Oh, it is.
So it's still SABA. Okay. There are some changes in the background in terms of their back office systems, and so but just the way in which they don't enforce using ANPR, but they monitor. So there's some improvements around how they do that as well. So better deployment. So I'll talk with their regional manager about at some point them coming to relevant overview and scrutiny committee and presenting on what they've done and how they're performing as well, so they're held to account as well.
I'm going to say nothing. I'm just going to say 3 words which will instill fear: school gate parking. Okay. Are we all content? Yes. Thank you. And we go now to licensing.
So page 22 of the document in front of you is not, in fact, a second stab at doing a review on parking services, but is instead licensing, and that was the mea culpa I alluded to earlier on. However, when you look within the documentation, obviously it is licensing. There are the 2 recommendations down there. Worth highlighting, this is kind of like a bit of a preview audit with the full audit actually taking place this year. And I would point to the priority 2 recommendation in respect of KPIs. Management provided a comment, which is that the team are happy to develop these KPIs, but need some time to ensure that this can be done through Flair without causing too much additional manual work for the team. And the timeline for that was the 1st of the 10th, 25. From our perspective, that's really important. One of the things we'll be looking to undertake during the next review is indeed following on from this, measuring against the KPIs, checking to see the accuracy of management information and the fulsomeness of the KPIs that have been put in place. And I'll stop there and ask if anyone's got any questions.
Yes, I did pick up, I think, I think it was in this one, a reference to the fact that additional resource would be helpful. Gentlemen? No?
Nothing to add.
No? 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 Anybody on this side? No? 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 Right, okay, onwards and upwards.
So absence management.
Yes, pretty.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, this is actually probably the least exciting of the audit reports that are sat with you today. So the samples indicated that there was occasional minor problems, but again, if I benchmark against other organisations, actually I sit very comfortably. So I don't think there's any point in me kind of like talking through any more detail. While management have provided responses, ultimately, there's a limited extent to which they can actually action this. And it's worth also just highlighting Pretty is obviously a facilitator rather than actually having the ability to force individuals to do this, particularly when they're actually on long-term sick and have ongoing issues. I don't know. Anyone have any questions?
Do you know what I do?
Please do.
Yes, I do.
Shortly.
Anybody, folks? No. No. I just had one question, and there were some references to delays in dealing with certain items. Are you resolving, or are you trying to eradicate those delays? Not in specific items, but generally. And the reason why I ask is that if there was a delay in getting to a point, could that delay work against us if the situation went to an employment tribunal and the complainant, if you like, or the member of staff, I guess, said, well, it would have been different and it would have been better if it had been dealt with more swiftly?
It's difficult to kind of pinpoint where those delays come from, you know, especially when you're dealing with people that are on long-term sickness.
Yeah.
Sometimes the delay is caused because of the NHS and how difficult it is to kind of diagnose individuals in the first place, especially if they've got a multitude of like medical conditions that are preventing them from coming to work. I think the main thing is making sure that the communication with the individual is kept consistent and it is recorded, and there is an ability to do that on Outturn. But as Phil kind of alluded to, that ownership lies with managers as opposed to HR. So from an HR point of view, we run regular reports. We have our monthly scrutiny meetings as well, in which we highlight any cases, do spot checks to make sure that those regular communications are being documented. So if anything was to go to a tribunal, or if a claimant was not happy with how the process was dealt with, if there was a delay, etc., at least we can show that that communication between the organisation and the individual has happened on a regular basis. And sometimes 9 out of 10 times that delay could be caused because of extenuating circumstances, either at the NHS, or if an ill health retirement is taking longer than usual to come through, that might be because of other parties that are involved, like occupational health, the pension scheme, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, can I just kind of chip in?
Yes, of course.
Just to kind of like directly answer your question there, not that it didn't, yeah, absolutely it can impact, like particularly if somebody's off, for example, for work-related stress, or there's somebody suspended, you've got a legal obligation to provide ongoing proactive support and be able to demonstrate that through your systems. And failure to do so can absolutely be held against you at the tribunal.
Thank you very much. I've just lost my place for a moment. Right, okay. So our recommendation is to note the contents of the draft. Oh no, that's the external auditors. So I think we...
If I may carry on.
Oh, really?
There's a few other little bits I want to talk about. I won't keep you too long.
What?
I know. So the first is the plan. It's important that you hold me to account on delivery of the plan. So on Appendix B, page 26 of the documentation, you will note that the plan isn't proceeding exactly as we wanted. So we sit here towards the end of Q2, and there's a number of audits which are either in progress or to be delivered, and that's because some of those were delayed. Important to add that some of those audits have moved on a little bit. Financial resilience is one that I'm undertaking myself and is not far away from being completed. Key financial controls at the next meeting scheduled on the 10th, which was before this document started to be pulled together, which is why that was in like that. I don't know if that meeting took place or not, but I know it's, thank you. And contract management definitely is in its the dying days of that audit. So yes, so I think the plan is going reasonably well, but obviously we need to keep the impetus up. Just wanted to kind of like say that by way of holding me to account, which is important. And the other thing I would just allude to is the recommendations. Just wanted to highlight that we actually have no recommendations outstanding at this point in time. So many thanks to the organisation, the executive team for providing feedback in relation to the numerous phone calls that there have been recently in respect of providing evidence for progress on the outstanding recommendations and making sure that they're completed by the agreed date.
And I think on that basis, I'm going to look to Sally, and I'm happy to be associated with this. And I think it would be appropriate for us to recognise to the entire staff across the piece what you just said, and the fact that we are a very good authority doing very good things. And that's because of the people that we got working for us. And I think it's worth recognising that. Do my colleagues agree with that?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's been a culture over the years that's built up. It's not just immediate.
Indeed.
It's built a culture of excellence over the years, I would say.
So,
thank you very much for your comments.
20 quid you'll
I think that the staff should feel very pleased, and certainly we're very pleased. And the staff survey certainly reflects a very happy organisation that's very well run.
So
delighted that that's the case.
Yeah, Nigel, if you can feedback the appreciation.
Absolutely, I feel RSLT and CLT again. A lot of hard work goes into no overdue recommendations. And it's a KPI for 1 month. I'm going to actually have green, which is always good. But it's because it is a very much a stretch target. It's one of those things that when you do achieve it, like we will have done this month, you feel very positive about yourself, and then you have to wait a few more months before you do it again. But it does take a lot of people pushing in the right direction, with a lot of other pressures on. Audit can often be looked upon, when especially when you're a front-facing service. It's a lot of Ian services there. They get 5, 6 recommendations. They've got people in front of them wanting services delivered. They're doing a lot of physical work as well. For their commitment to go around and actually make sure those recommendations are done, it's a lot harder in some services than it is in others. But it's really positive that we're in a good mindset. And I say we're achieving 1 month, we watch it again. We aim to stay there now. So from that perspective, we've got some better controls in place. I would say that Tia, Layla, who works for Philip at Tia, has been instrumental in helping us to achieve that. I want to think of a really nice way of saying she's super aggressive, but she's the right level, and I don't hear any negative comments from officers. She's very black and white, but equally she's supportive when she needs to be supportive. So I think that's a very big kind of tick from Tia from my perspective, particularly a few months into a new contract. I think that's been a big positive.
And I have to say, of course, that we are not going to get lulled into a false sense of security. Don't you even think about it. But yeah, so that's good. That's good. Well done. Thank you. The next one is the final one. There is another one. Treasury management. Right. Now this is. Where will you two? Oh, and by the way,
this is where even a dedicated officer will find it hard.
Hang on a minute. If you're still there, Kim, and you haven't sort of...
No, Kim's gone.
Has she gone? Oh dear, I don't know. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Right, is this you or Claire?
I'll say it's one. So I'm going to take it that the report's ready for the annual Treasury Management Outturn report. What I would say is there's no issues with any of the prudential indicators. They're all within our scope and sort of our set limits, and that there's no concerns that need to be raised to audit as part of this report.
Well, in fact, we've got a plethora of bankers, past and present, on this side of the table. So, comments?
Yeah, I've got nothing to say, and I think it's, as usual, there is nothing to see in this report that causes us any concern. Thank you.
But we'll find something next time.
Well, you found a comma somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
I feel duty bound to say a few.
Well, can I just Paul?
I was going
on the second ground.
Garrett, come on.
Right, no, but I think the only concern that I've got
Yes.
is the little table that I saw about financing HRA.
Is that 2.10?
18, 2.18.
2.18?
2.18, right.
Okay.
Financing costs work out at 18.4% of, I suppose, that's revenues, isn't it?
So this is a really interesting table, and thank you for alluding to it, because there's a lot going on there. From a HRA perspective, what that says is what is the annual cost to revenue of financing your capital borrowing. So you'll notice last year, 23-24, it was 17.7%, and 24-25 is 18.44%. That is because we've done a huge amount more investment in our capital stock, and so we've borrowed more to do that, and so the cost of financing that borrowing is slightly higher. Equally, borrowing we're taking out now is more expensive than borrowing we were taking out several years ago when interest rates were down at 2%. That's very much acceptable. It's part of our HRA business plan to borrow more over the next 2 or 3 years, and it's well within our abilities to finance that. You'll see that the limit is around 20.6%, which was set for last year, and that'll be slightly higher for next year as well. So we set a limit that says this is what the HRA can absolutely afford comfortably without an issue. At that point, you need to think about it and think about what you're doing. So we're well within that. I know it only seems small percentages, but it takes a lot for them to change. It's a £70 million budget. So from that perspective, it's not bad news. It's good news that we're investing in our capital stock. The line above it is far more interesting, because from the general fund perspective, it's a minus number. What that says is we make more money from our Treasury investments than we pay in interest for borrowing. And that's because our borrowing is down to £5.7 million, which I haven't checked, but it's probably one of the lowest, if not the lowest per capita in the UK in terms of debt per resident. So from that perspective, we're in a very strong position. It means we have options. Having low levels of debt is not always a good thing, because sometimes you want to use debt for investment. And I think that will change, and that's what I want to allude to the committee. We've got some big plans coming up, leisure investment, potentially housing investment partnership, where we might look to do some borrowing. So you will see potentially some significant changes in those numbers over the next year or two. So just don't be shocked or alarmed. They'll all be within our annual Treasury management strategies.
There is a big swing, isn't there, between 6.03 and then 0.93 and then 4.19.
Yeah, and in terms of that, part of that is because our cash balances have dropped year on year. They're £20 million less. Our actual return, believe it or not, last year interest rates started the year at 5.25% and ended the year at 4.5%, yet our average rate of return was 0.05% higher. So we were getting a greater return even though interest rates were going down. Now, there's 1,000 parts playing in that. When we can invest, when money becomes available, how long we invest it for, depends on what rate of return we get. But it shows that our Treasury management is performing very well, because with lower interest rates, it's getting a higher return. So from that perspective, it's a real positive, particularly when you consider we don't have long-term investments. So it's not that we've had longer-term investments come out and we've reinvested them. It's actually just finding the best investment for that cash on a day-to-day basis.
Should become a bank, it didn't better than most of them.
I hesitate to say this, but I feel I need to, because you've just made a very good description of where we are at the present time, but we're staring down a calendar of 2, maybe 3 years, I imagine, and I would hate to think that all the good work that we've done, and I'm not saying this on a political basis, but all the good work that we've done gets diluted, shall we say, by things which are outside our control.
And in terms of going forward and what may or may not happen, new entities will be created. They'll be managed within a certain framework.
Yeah.
Our job at this moment, and my job, and one of the few times I have to put my Section 151 hat on, is I need to look after this money in the best way for the taxpayers to go on. We will continue to do that. Yet there comes a point in the future where we merge with other authorities, then maybe they can learn from the good practice we do, or we can share some of their good practice. We are not the best at everything. I'm pretty sure of that without looking at everything. We'll be able to learn from others, they'll be able to learn from us. And from that perspective, the greater good may or may not be better. But we are 2 years away. At the moment, when it comes to treasury management, this is an area where if you get wrong, I lose my job. And I lose my credibility. So from that perspective, I very much, we set a strategy, we stick to that strategy, we get external advisors to advise us along the way. We set some very high benchmarks for the team in terms of what we achieve and what we try to get in terms of our returns, with always making sure that our investments are secure. We have no risk investments at all. So from that perspective, the return at just under 5% is a good return on the cash balances that we have without taking any significant risks at all.
Good. Okay, the recommendation is to note the report. Yep. And I think that completes the business for this evening. The risk register, as I think you've alluded to, that will be coming to the next audit committee meeting.
Yep.
And it might be quite a busy audit committee meeting.
It will probably be very busy because Philip promised us lots of reports. In fact, I think Philip did have one over AOB.
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
I was going to raise into the AOB section. Yeah, so there is an intention to bring a draft plan to the next audit committee. It's a requirement under the global internal audit standards, as I say, to explicitly link the plan to the risk that the organisation faces and to entrench certain new ways of working, which again I'll talk to at the next audit committee, but it includes things like looking afresh at cybersecurity, looking at integrating more analytical work within the audit plan. So I'll have a separate conversation with Nigel about the way that we do that, and we'll bring an initial draft plan to the next meeting. That's not to say you've got to approve that version. In fact, I would advise you not to, but it will be your starter for 10 effectively.
And embedded in all of your reports today, there's the list of bite-sized tidbits, if you like,
yes.
Which I've looked at some of those, and I think they're very good and they're very helpful. And also, we've had a letter in today regarding the new charges or proposed charges for external auditing.
Yes.
Yeah, good. On which happy note, thank you all very much indeed for your attendance. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again as always. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good meeting.
Good night from home.